The morning sun was already beginning to warm the bustling streets of Medan, Indonesia, when Budi woke up in his small rented room. At 35, he still slept on the same thin mattress he had brought from his village 15 years ago. The peeling walls and the rusty, barely functioning fan were silent witnesses to a life that seemed stuck in time. Budi worked as an assistant in a hardware store. Every day, the same routine. Waking up at 5 in the morning, drinking a bitter black coffee, walking 40 minutes to work, organizing shelves, serving customers, returning home when the sun was already hiding behind the buildings. It was a safe, predictable life, but empty of meaning. On that particular morning in May, while walking to work, Budi passed by a small community garden that was being cultivated by some residents of the neighborhood. An elderly lady, with her hands buried in the earth, was planting something with care and devotion. Her eyes shone in a way that Budi couldn't understand. How could someone find so much joy in working with soil? "Good morning, young man," the lady greeted him with a broad smile. "Do you know what I'm planting here?" Budi stopped somewhat awkwardly. "No, ma'am. Mango seeds," she replied, showing some seeds in her calloused hand. "Do you know what's most fascinating about a seed? It needs to die to live. It needs to stop being a seed to become a tree." Budi nodded politely and continued on his way, but those words echoed in his mind all day. You need to stop being a seed and become a tree. What did that mean to him? That night, lying on his thin mattress, Budi looked at the stained ceiling and asked himself a question he had been avoiding for years. What did he really want from life? The answer came quickly and painfully. He had always dreamed of having his own business, a small carpentry workshop. His father had taught him the trade as a child, and Budi loved the smell of wood, the feeling of creating something with his own hands. But fear held him back. Fear of failure, fear of losing the security of a monthly salary, fear of the judgment of others. He then realized that he lived like that seed still buried in the earth, intact, safe but unable to grow. He was protecting his essence so carefully that he had forgotten the purpose of his existence. The following days were filled with deep unease. Budi began to observe the people around him with different eyes. His boss, always irritated, trapped in an unhappy marriage but afraid to start over. The neighbor who dreamed of going back to school but said she was too old. The coworker who wanted to move to another city but didn't have the courage to leave his relative. They were all seeds refusing to germinate. One afternoon, during the lunch break, Budi returned to the community garden. The lady was there again, now watering the seedlings that were already beginning to sprout. "Did you come back to see the seeds?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Yes," Budi replied, sitting down on a nearby bench. "The lady said that the seed needs to die to live. I'm trying to understand that." The lady sat down beside him, wiping her hands on her faded flower apron. When a seed is planted in the ground, it's in the dark, pressed down by the weight of the soil. It's uncomfortable, even frightening. The shell that protected it for so long needs to crack, to break. The seed needs to abandon its original form, the one that kept it safe, so that a root can emerge and seek depth, and a sprout can rise towards the light. She paused, looking at the green seedlings. If the seed clings to its form, if it resists transformation for fear of losing what it is, it simply rots in the earth. It never becomes the magnificent tree it could be. It never bears fruit. It never offers shade. It never fulfills its purpose. Budi felt a tightness in his chest. But what if I crack and can't grow? What if I try and fail? "Ah, my son," the woman said tenderly. "The question is not whether you will succeed or not. The question is, would you rather die as an unrealized seed or live the experience of trying to become a tree? Even if you don't grow as tall as you hoped, even if you don't bear as much fruit, you will have lived. You will have tried. You will have honored your potential." That conversation changed something fundamental within Budi. That night, he picked up an old notebook and began to do calculations, plans, drawings. If he saved half his salary for a year, he could rent a small space. He could buy basic tools. You could start by doing simple jobs, custom furniture, repairs. But there was a bigger problem: fear. Fear was like that protective seed coat, familiar and comfortable. Abandoning it meant exposing himself to vulnerability, to failure, to judgment. For weeks, Booty struggled internally. There were days when he woke up determined to change his life, and others when fear completely paralyzed him. The tension between who he was and who he could become was consuming him from the inside. Then something happened that forced him to decide. The hardware store where he worked was sold to new owners who planned to automate many processes and reduce the number of employees. Booty received the news that he would be laid off in 2 months. What could have been a tragedy ended up becoming the necessary pressure for his transformation. Just as the seed needs the pressure of the earth and water to crack its shell, Booty needed that crisis to finally break down the walls of fear that imprisoned him. With the severance pay he would receive and his savings, he would have exactly enough to start his dream. It was now or never. Booty remembered the woman's words. The seed needs to stop being a seed. He realized he needed to stop being the secure and complacent employee to become the entrepreneur he had always dreamed of being. This meant abandoning not only his job, but also the identity he had built over the years, the way he saw himself, the limits he imposed on himself. In the following months, Booty lived the most intense experience of his life. He rented a small shed on the outskirts of Medan, bought used but functional tools, and began advertising his services in the neighborhood. The first jobs were modest: repairing a table, making simple shelves, refurbishing old chairs. But each piece he created was made with love and dedication. There were difficult times. There were weeks without clients, tight bills, nights of doubt. There were people who laughed at him, who said he was throwing his life away. His uncle called him irresponsible. Former work colleagues shook their heads in pity when they met him on the street. But Booty also discovered something surprising. He was alive. For the first time in years, he woke up with a purpose. His hands ached from working with wood, but it was a good pain, a pain that meant creation. Each challenge overcome, each satisfied customer, each completed piece was like a root deepening into the soil or a branch stretching towards the sky. 6 months after opening his workshop, a customer was so impressed with a bookcase Booty had made that he took photos and posted them on social media. The work caught attention and orders started coming in. Booty hired an assistant, then another. His workshop began to gain a reputation for the quality and meticulousness of its furniture. A year and a half after leaving the hardware store, Booty stood in his workshop, watching 3 employees working on different projects. The walls were still simple, the space still modest, but there was life there. There was growth. There was purpose. That day, he walked back to the community garden. The lady was there, as always, tending to her plants. The seedlings she had planted that distant morning were now small trees, some already bearing their first fruits. "Hello, young carpenter," she greeted him with that warm smile. "I see you've decided to crack the shell." Booty smiled back, feeling a deep gratitude. "Yes, ma'am. And you were right. Transformation hurts. It's scary. But it's the only way to truly live." They were silent for a moment, observing the garden. Then the woman said, "You know, there's a part of the metaphor I haven't mentioned before. When a tree grows and bears fruit, it produces new seeds. And those seeds carry the potential to become new trees. One person's growth inspires the growth of others." Booty looked around the garden and realized there were more people planting now than before. The community garden had grown, taking up a larger area. People of all ages were digging the soil, planting, and tending to it. Each one cracking their own shells, each one transforming in their own way. In the following weeks, Booty noticed changes around him. His former coworker finally mustered the courage and moved to Jakarta, where he had always wanted to live. His neighbor enrolled in a night course. Even his uncle, who had criticized him so much, commented that he was thinking of returning to painting, a hobby he had abandoned decades ago. Booty then understood the power of transformation. When a person has the courage to stop being who they were and become who they can be, they not only change their own life, but create ripples that touch everyone around them. They become living proof that change is possible, that dreams don't have to remain dreams, that it's never too late to grow. Today, when Booty wakes up in his small apartment, a little better than his old room, he looks at his calloused hands and smiles. They tell the story of his transformation. Each callus, each scar, each mark is evidence that he had the courage to crack his shell and grow. He learned that life isn't about remaining safe and protected like an intact seed. Life is about having the courage to transform, to die to an old version of yourself so that a new one can emerge. It's about accepting the discomfort of growth, the vulnerability of change, the risk of transformation. The seed only grows when it ceases to be a seed. And we only truly live when we have the courage to stop being who we were to become who we can be. In Medan, in a small workshop on the outskirts of the city, the sound of wood being worked echoes as a daily reminder of this simple yet profound truth. The purpose of the seed was never to remain a seed. Its purpose was always to become a tree, even if it meant losing its original form, even if it meant facing the unknown, even if it meant cracking and transforming completely. And just as those seedlings in the community garden became trees that now provide shade and fruit, Budi became a living inspiration that transformation, however frightening it may be, is the only path to a truly meaningful life. Because, in the end, the question that defines our lives is not, what if I try and fail? But rather, what if I never try and spend my whole life wondering what could have been? The first question may bring temporary failure. The second brings eternal regret. The seed that Budi was no longer exists, but in its place has grown a strong tree, with deep roots and branches that extend towards the sun. And this tree now produces its own fruits, its own seeds, inspiring others to have the courage to begin their own transformations. Because that is the beauty of the metaphor and the truth of life. The seed only grows when it ceases to be a seed. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to Budi's transformative story. I hope it touched your heart and, who knows, planted a seed of courage in you to begin your own transformation. Remember, you too can be like Budi. You too can have the courage to crack the shell that keeps you trapped and grow towards your dreams. It's never too late to transform. It's never too late to live with purpose. If this story inspired you in any way, please like this video. This helps me continue bringing more stories that touch the soul and transform lives. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next inspiring stories I have prepared for you. Share this message with someone who needs to hear that it's possible to change, that it's possible to grow, that it's possible to transform. Sometimes, a story is all someone needs to find courage. Thank you so much for being here. Until the next story. And never forget, a seed only grows when it stops being a seed. May you have the courage to grow,